morning and welcome to Candid Conversations. I'm Mona and my guest today is Clive Johnson. Clive is an excellent writer, a publisher, a voice talent, an interfaith minister, and the man behind the project and the website Labyrinth Around America. Let's go over and meet Clive now. Hi Clive, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Hello Mona, it's lovely to speak to you.
Tell me first, what is your typical day like? How do you manage to use the measly 24 hours to do so much?
Oh my goodness. I really don't think there is a typical day. I'm actually really quite fortunate these days in that I'm not working in a kind of 9-to-5 job, which used to be the way that I worked. I used to work in the corporate world in management consultancy, and they used to take up most of those 24 hours usually, and that was very consuming. And when I wasn't working, I was usually traveling on trains and on the underground in London and so on. But these days I have very much a freestyle lifestyle. So I sort of have fingers in a number of different pies, so to speak. I don't know if that's an English expression you'd be familiar with, but you know, when people ask me what do you do, I struggle a little bit because I actually do a number of different things. Right. I suppose for all motivation for me, and this has been a kind of life change over the last 5 to 10 years or so, is that I like to think that what I'm doing has a kind of purpose in my own development, my own learning, but also hopefully in giving to others. So this idea of a ministry, for want of a better word, this idea of kind of operating a little bit outside the normal rules of work is what I'm about. So there honestly isn't a typical day. Today, I've actually started the day doing some writing, and I've made reasonable progress so far, which is a little bit surprising because it took me a little time to actually begin that, which is often the norm. Actually, you actually have to take that first step, and actually when you start writing, and in my case, my first draft is what I'm doing at the moment. I'm just writing a short story, is voice dictated. So I will dictate into my computer, and so I'm just as though I'm telling a story, and then I will come back and work on that and edit it, sitting at the keyboard, as it were. So I can see that I'm going to continue with that after we speak, but that needn't be the case. That's not necessarily a typical day, because I'm involved in these different activities. I may be doing different things. So you mentioned in the introduction that I do voice talent work, and that actually takes a reasonable amount of my time. The stories I'm writing at the moment and books I've written, I then will audio record for Audible, typically, although sometimes for other audiobook outlets as well. And I also offer that service for other authors. So actually quite a lot of my time is recording for other authors. In fact, I had one who I've worked with before, just came through yesterday and said, you know, are you available? I've got a new book, and that will be interesting to work on.
So do you offer that service through your publisher website?
It is through the website, but also Audible, which is an Amazon company, has its own service for connecting authors with narrators and producers. So I not only narrate the books, but I actually produce, edit and produce the the audio, which I had to take some training in because there's a degree of skill involved in producing at a level of quality that is expected, obviously, because the books go on to be sold, and that quite often takes more time than the actual recording and editing. So that's something that will be occupying me probably later this week. And there, out of the 24 hours when I'm recording, I usually record at night. I usually record in one particular place, and because whilst it's has double glazed windows and so on, and I've recently put up foam panels which help with the acoustics, it can still be quite noisy during the daytime. So I find that if there's less distraction, I do a much better recording, and obviously it takes less time. So quite often I will work into the night on that, which is against my usual way of working, because I'm not good with late nights these days, really. I also house sit. So actually I'm house sitting at the moment. I go from place to place, looking after animals. And I've been on a little farm, for example, and at the moment my charges are 3 cats who are the most secretive cats I think I've ever known. They hide away all the time, and so very easy to look after, and 2 guinea pigs who I think eat more than I do. They're constantly nibbling at cabbages and carrots, all sorts of things like that. So that means I move around quite a lot. I'm a minister. I trained with One Spirit Interfaith Seminary in London, which was a 2-year program. And so occasionally I am doing ministry work, not often, but occasionally I will be a celebrant at a wedding ceremony, for example, or some other ceremony or event. And I have quite an interest in other projects, which I guess we'll go on to talk about. We mentioned the Labyrinth as one of my main interests, and the project there I've been involved with in the US.
What happened first, writing or becoming a minister?
Oh my goodness. I suppose ministry is something that has been growing, it's sort of developing for some time. It's only, 6 years ago, I'm losing track of time a little bit now, but not too long ago that I set about the seminary training and then was ordained. So that's more recent. Writing, my first ventures into writing were probably about 10 years ago, and initially I was focused on self-development topics, and I was trying to put on paper a lot of what I had learned and experienced, partly through my own corporate background actually, but also drawing on many other things. So this was looking at finding out your purpose in life and having a vision and this kind of thing. And I have to say that early writing I'm not proud of particularly. I think I had a lot of good ideas. I turned one of those books into what I called a toolkit for businesses. So corporates and people working particularly in management positions, in staff management and so on, were the main focus for me. And with a lady called Jackie Keddy, who's still a very good friend of mine, and she was a detective chief inspector in the London Metropolitan Police, who went, after a life of fighting crime, she went in her later years in the police to the human resources area, and she particularly became involved in a coaching program, and she was actually responsible for the the police's coaching program, and at the time I was also coaching. I was trained as a coach, and I did some work with her, and we became good friends, which doesn't usually happen in business. You usually keep a very professional relationship, but we worked together separately, actually, as she was leaving the police at the time, and we wrote 2 books together. One was on coaching, and one was on conflict management. And that was another area where we both had a strong interest in helping people who, in business, who had a conflict, the sort of area of mediation. And Jackie, because of her police background and the work she also did beyond coaching, was in investigating grievances, usually very high profile, some very, they made the news in England, some of these stories. They were very big abuse cases and things like this. And so we developed together, with my kind of corporate background and her knowledge of detective work and work in the HR field, a training course for human resource people who had to carry out or had to commission people doing grievance investigation. And that lasted a while, and we ran quite a few training courses, and thoroughly enjoyed that. And then Jackie retired, and we kind of gave up our business relationship at that time. But the books that we wrote were published by a mainstream publisher, and that was very useful experience for me to go through, to sort of understand the whole process of putting a book together, and learning the ways and the different people involved, the different stages, and also brought home to me just how much is expected of an author. Actually, you tend to think if you have a publisher, they go off and sell it for you, and of course they do have distribution networks, but you're expected to do a lot of the work, and also you lose rights. So interestingly, when they sell the rights to a book, sometimes you will only get a very small percentage. And similarly, if they sell a book at a discount, which they often do, you will get a percentage of that discount. And so it's not necessarily, unless you're very successful, which we weren't with these books, it's not really a good way to make a living. And in fact, literally the other day, I had the very first audiobook sent through to me from this publisher, which I was paid a very small amount, and it was not offered to me as the author to do the voice work. So one of the things I like about self-publishing now is having control and being able to decide on everything from the cover to obviously things like the audio work as well, which is an important part of it for me.
You also have a book, Understanding Interfaith.
Yes.
And you are an interfaith minister. Now, did you choose interfaith consciously, or did it just happen?
Oh, it's a very interesting question. Growing up in England, when I did, in schools and so on, we had very much a Christian tradition. It's much less the case nowadays, I think. It's much less commonly taught, as it were. So I grew up hearing the Bible stories, going to Sunday school, as it was called, and so on. And that was my kind of tradition. And indeed, when I was quite young, my early 20s, I was quite involved in the church. And I can't quite remember why, but I went away from that for quite a while. And I suppose interfaith came about, the interest in interfaith came about for me through wide reading, really, which probably started 15 years ago or something like, I don't know, quite some time ago, but I started getting some exposure to the teachings of other faith traditions, and not just faith traditions. I had a real interest in philosophy, mythology I mentioned, popular science, things like quantum physics, as much as I can understand it, but beginning to see that there was a real interplay between a lot of these things, and that when I came back to think about the Christian tradition, the way I interpreted things or have been told things perhaps have been a fairly basic level, and I just trusted things that I was told or read without really kind of understanding from within. So I began to find that reading about other faiths, learning about other faiths, informed my understanding, and in a sense, sometimes I would relate to stories from other faiths more strongly. They would make more sense. So a lot of the Buddhist teaching, for example, I really tune into the idea of nirvana and so on. And that probably was helped by the fact that I also became quite a practitioner in meditation around about the same time. So I learned transcendental meditation. I was on another meditation course, and I was introduced to the Labyrinth, which was a form of meditating for me as well. And I think that starts to open up the sort of inquiry from within you, really, and you start to go less away from what's going on in your mind and intellectualizing, and more getting some sort of insights from within, and visions, and not visions, but appreciations of different topics. And the interfaith, I suppose, I just wanted to put all this together into some sort of structure, and I heard about this course that was running, and spoke to some friends who were actually ministers, and found out the course was about to start. And it was a course that was not necessarily about the end product, as it were, do this and you will qualify as a minister and you'll be able to go away and conduct weddings or whatever. It was about learning about, at a fairly high level, because obviously you can only do this at fairly high levels, about the main faith traditions and some of their so-called spiritual practices. So we did things like Tai Chi, and they were kind of earth-based faiths that came in as well. So you would be doing things with working with nature and sort of meditating in that field. You would visit and you would get instruction from someone from like the local Hindu temple in London where we were, and we would go and visit, sit in on a service or two, and then go to a mosque, and then go to a synagogue, and so on and so on. And so that was really wonderful, this kind of exposure to these different traditions. But a lot of it was around your own self-reflection and development, and growing with a group of people as well. And I'm still very closely in touch with a part of what we did was we had a number of small groups where we were working together in studying, and we are still, most of us are still meeting, even though the course finished 4 or 5 years ago, and are very closely in touch. And when there are problems, one of our group has a lot of worries at the moment, so we will be supporting and in touch with her. But a lot around self-development, a lot around rites of passage, which, for example, in my experience, I went through no formal rite of passage between adolescence and adulthood. It used to be the case, but or if you're in the Jewish faith, you might have a bar mitzvah or so on, but that doesn't happen. So we're able to do some of these things retrospectively. You missed your rite of passage, now you can have a ceremony, which is made for you, kind of thing. And I think actually that whole thing around ceremony and ritual and really coming to an appreciation of what I believe is, are important things that we've lost a lot in our own world, was very valuable, incredibly valuable. So that's kind of how my interest in interfaith came about. And I don't know if I will always, at the moment, you see, I tend to focus on at one time a particular interest. It might be what I'm reading. I have a great interest in the Greek gods and goddesses, and they're very similar. They are archetypes. They are expressions of divinity, and you can see the same expressions in the Hindu deities, for example. In the sort of Abrahamic faith, then there is this one God, but there's lots of different aspects, and Islam talks about 100 names of God, for example, because we need to, in order to kind of get any sense of divinity, have a way of relating to characteristics and attributes. So I'm actually finding the Greek gods and goddesses, not the tales that we read, the sort of romantic poetry, but actually really getting into the character, really understanding the character of them, is proving to be a real interest for me at the moment. And I'm probably coming a bit closer to Buddhism again. I'm not entirely sure what brand of Buddhism, but I'm very interested in the whole topics, these whole things about how you enter yourself with your ego narrative and this kind of thing. So I will draw on different things as they seem relevant and meaningful.
You travel a lot. As you yourself say, your lifestyle is nomadic. Is there a favorite place to go to? Somewhere you want to go again and again?
Oh my goodness. There's one immediate place that comes to mind, which was my home city for 12 years, and that is the city of Brighton and Hove on the south coast in England. I go there regularly. I house sit there regularly. I have friends there and many reasons to go there. And it always does feel like coming home when I go there, actually. It's a very different city to virtually every other place, certainly in southern England, that I know. It's quite unique. It has a very diverse population. There is a lot of, for example, music schools there, music academies, so there's always live performances going on. It has a very embracing culture of LGBTQ population, for example, very kind of tolerant sort of place, open, and politics are very different to the rest of the UK as well. It has the only Green Party member of Parliament in the UK, as an example. So I always feel a freedom when I go there. But I was actually talking about this very topic. I was invited to go and preach, actually. I was to lead a service at a Unitarian church last week. and I chose to talk on the subject of home as a nomad, what that means, and my focus was on the Greek. We have a cat. You might hear. No, that's mine. He's trying to drink my water. It was on the Greek goddess Hestia, which many people don't know much about, but she was the goddess who kept the hearth going, the home, and was really the most loved of Zeus. I was reflecting as a part of that on what it's like going from home to home. And actually at that time, I think I slept in 7 different beds in 8 different nights, in at least 4 or 5 different cities. And I don't think I've ever really felt not at home. When you're invited into somebody's house and you're a respectful guest, and you accept the hospitality, and you try to return that in other ways, and you don't overstay your welcome and all this sort of thing, then usually it has been absolutely wonderful. It's a wonderful opportunity to go and be with people and in different places and different situations.
Okay, now you just talked about the Labyrinth Around America. One question I've been thinking of ever since I've read your book, Labyrinths: why take Labyrinths to America? Why not Europe or England? Why America?
Very good question. And the simple answer is I don't know. It's something that comes from within again. It's something that I felt drawn to and felt led to, if you like. So the idea came when I was in America. I was in Houston at the time of a training course, which was focused on the Labyrinth, and I'd been hearing stories of people who were individuals who had done some remarkable work with the Labyrinth, as it were. I don't like using the word tool, but kind of the Labyrinth had been their focus. And it was at the time of the election, the presidential election, 2 or 3 years ago, and there was a real polarized feeling in the room on the day after the results were known. And it just struck me, the Labyrinth is something that doesn't ask questions about politics or religion or anything, and it doesn't discriminate. You can be from any background. You don't need qualifications to walk the Labyrinth. So I came up with this idea. This idea came to me, I should say, to take a labyrinth around the border states, which was kind of like a container of the mainland continental USA. And I suppose there was an aspect of, I don't really know that I saw it as a road trip, a traditional road trip, but there was a little bit of aspect of this would be interesting to do. But for some reason, there was this view of doing this circuit, and the labyrinth, being laid out in different places and different people coming to walk it, and by the fact the same labyrinth was going around the country and in some way it was connecting people. And I just held that question open, and I did hold open the question, should this be here, or should it be in Europe? Should it be in the UK? Bearing in mind it was the time that we'd had the Brexit vote here, and so in the UK there was a very similar, still is, very similar division between people's views, and if there's a need for bringing people together, as it were, and communities together and healing, then that would be needed here as well. But I felt drawn, I didn't really feel any push in that direction, no enthusiasm. There was nothing saying, yes, do it in the UK, that's what you should be doing, so do it in Europe. It was very much in the US. And I think that there is something about being a bit of an outsider that I'm a bit objective from what's going on in the day-to-day in the lives of the people that I'm meeting and connecting with. Whilst obviously I associate with a lot of their concerns and so on, I'm kind of a bit objective. And ministry, because it is a kind of ministry, requires that you are objective. If there had been any trace of the Brexit issue in my work coming through, if it was in the UK, at the time, I mean, I have become much more balanced in terms of my acceptance of different views and so on. But at the time, I was very strongly on one side. And I mean, I still am in terms of what I believe is right for the country and so on, but in terms of where my real deep emotional and personal passions, which could so easily be triggered, were. So if you were looking at doing a healing project with an objective position in a country where you are on one very strong side, even though you're most of the time trying to keep yourself from talking about that or letting it come out, I couldn't honestly say that I wouldn't go and be judging some of the people I met, and we're not really the case in America. I meet people on both sides, and I listen to them, and I can be detached in terms of my judgment, which is interesting, because often I will not agree with their position or whatever, but I seem to be able to do that. So I honestly don't know, but it is more about going with feeling. It's more about going with intuition, if you like, or I would say divine leading. And it wasn't an instant decision, but it was decided pretty clearly and pretty quickly. And actually the decision really was taken because you say, well, this is a crazy project. This is going to take a lot of time. It's going to cost a lot of money, and how am I going to afford it, and et cetera, et cetera. And what is the purpose, and all those kind of questions. But I asked this question actually when I walked a labyrinth, and this is something you can do when you walk a labyrinth, is take a question with you, something perhaps quite significant that is bothering you, that you want an answer to. And you may well get an insight, you may well get some clarity there and then, or it may come later, but just keeping it open. So that was my question. Should I do this project? And the answer that came back to me was, it's up to you. If you don't, somebody else will. You have an opportunity to do this. So it wasn't like a loud booming voice that said, yes, you are the one, but it was, you have an opportunity. You've been provided with this chance, and I don't have dependents because I lead a nomadic lifestyle. I can travel, and I was in a position that a lot of people aren't easily able to do it. So yeah, then you respond to that question, to that kind of response.
Okay. Before we continue our conversation, let me remind all my viewers that we would love to hear from you, your suggestions, your comments, your questions. Do write to us here, or you can get in touch with Clive on his website, on his Facebook page. You can buy his books on Amazon. All links are there in the video description. You can also get in touch with me on manicsylph.com, on my Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Pinterest, Instagram, wherever you are. All the links are again in the description. Do write back to us. We're waiting for you. Okay. Let's get on to the next section. It's a few quick questions. I want you to answer in just one sentence.
Mm.
You have a long list of talents. Tell me what you can't do.
What I can't do?
Yeah. Something which you just say, no, this is something I cannot. No.
Well, I think there's something very current, actually, which is I've been asked to possibly be a part of almost like a committee. It's kind of like going into a corporate with, you know, lists of roles and responsibilities and duties and blah, 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 blah. I wouldn't say I can't do, but I'm not sure that's me. It's not where I am. I'm a free flyer, really.
Favorite labyrinth to work on?
Favorite labyrinth? Oh my goodness. That will vary. It will depend on the time. One that comes to my mind that I absolutely loved was on my travels in America, which was a new type of labyrinth. It's not new to most people in the labyrinth world, but it's new to me, which is called the Man in the Maze pattern, which is a pattern, labyrinth pattern, very similar actually to the so-called Cretan one, but it looks differently when you approach it, which is popular among the Native American Tohono O'odham nation in Arizona and into Mexico. And so I had an opportunity to walk this labyrinth there. And also on the very same site, there was another labyrinth we don't find a lot in Europe and in America, which is really the Indian popular, the Chakra Vyuha labyrinth. So again, that's another very nice one to walk. And this was in the desert. It was by beside a church, but it was desert beyond you, so it was an amazing setting as well.
Something about you that you think is typically British?
Well, I try not to associate too much with Britishness. I don't really know what it means. I don't know. Courteousness is the British, often the, you know, over the top courteousness is a British trait.
That's true. That's true.
Queuing, that kind of thing, observing cues. I would be very strong on those things, I think. And I do like fish and chips.
You have a cat, right? So shall we call you a cat person or a dog person or something else?
Well, that I'm looking after other people's cats and dogs, so I get to meet quite a few different characters, and it really depends on the cat or the dog.
Okay. Because normally people like either cats or dogs.
They do, but actually when you get to meet different characters, you realize they all have very different personalities and they're sociable in different ways. It's difficult. I mean, there was a dog I really loved that died, and he was a former sheepdog, working dog. There was a collie, and he was a lovely, you know, you just call his name and he'd be there right away. And
that must be the collie mentioned in your acknowledgements of the book Labyrinth, I think.
Exactly. And there's a cat I love who I do visit quite regularly in Brighton, who's a Siamese cat who talks to you. So she will purr at you and then let you answer, and then she'll purr back and you have a conversation. So that's another particularly good friend of mine. But no, I don't really want to distinguish. I also love horses, actually. Horses, I don't ride these days, but I used to. I am a great lover of horses and all animals, really.
Okay. One greatest problem that you think ails humanity these days?
I think the greatest problem is nations working out global solutions to the future. And for example, climate change issue is an interesting one because obviously, yes, there are threats to lands at the moment which are being farmed or have been farmed and are now being, scorched and a barren, and threats to cities being overrun with tidal waves and so on. But actually, there's new lands opening up in northern Canada and different parts of the world. So if we were like the way that the nomads lived, and we were able to move freely, relatively freely, from place to place, to take advantage of these new places and so on, then I think we probably wouldn't have such big concerns that we do about climate change. We would adapt to it. And yes, I know there are worries about major catastrophe and destabilization, even in the way that the poles of the earth work and so on. But in the relative short term, I think if nations could get on better with other nations and allow freer movement, but that is impossible for me to imagine how that could come about. I have absolutely it just doesn't seem to be the way that we are destined to go, and we're not nomads in the main now. We're settled in cities, and we're tied to nations, and that clearly is a trend in some parts of the world to want to foster that identity and strengthen it.
Your next immediate goal, the near future?
Well, I don't tend. This is very different from my corporate background, where I used to be managing projects and everything was goal driven. I don't tend to have goals. I tend to have ambitions, and I'm very focused on this self-discovery around the Greek gods and goddesses. That's something I'm really working on at the moment, which is an ongoing thing over I don't know how long. I think also I'm trying to get more in touch with my own, the archetypes, angels, if you like, that speak to me. So kind of trying to get more in touch with the ethereal, what you might call astral life. There's different ways of describing that, but the spiritual world and my essence, my true essence, rather than the personality, the narrative that I put across. And that's why having breaks from Facebook from time to time where you are telling your story is actually quite important, I think.
Okay, role reversal. Is there a question that you want to ask me?
I would, because you did such wonderful work in translating my book into Hindi.
Thank you.
Very exciting. I'd love to know what interests there might be in India around the labyrinth, which, as I say, does have a part to play, but perhaps is often thought of, I mean, in the Mahabharata, I know it's spoken of as a battle.
Right.
This way of enclosing kind of the beast or your enemy. And that is the chakra vyuha model, as I understand it. But there's also the 7 chakras, I think, within the 7 main chakras within there. Right. And it's sometimes seen as like an opening lotus flower. So there's some wonderful symbolism there. But I'm wondering, do you sense at all if there is the seeds of an interest in the labyrinth and where you are, for example?
When I first read the title Labyrinth, the first thing I thought was not this labyrinth, but a maze. I'm not a Christian, so I have no idea. I did not know there were labyrinths in the churches. This is the first I came to know about it. But yes, in our culture, especially in the Muslim architecture, there are lots of mazes. Their main purpose being to hide from intruders or to be able to escape while there is an attack, and so on. Especially there's one in Lucknow in the Bara Imam Bara, and that it is such a maze you can't find your way out of it. I tried, And there are places there where you can stand and you can hear what is being, that is on the upper level, and you can hear what is being talked of in the lower level or on other places, as if they're just speaking to you through the walls. That's the architecture. So that's what I thought. My first instinct was it must be something to do with the history of mazes or where they came from. But this labyrinth was something very different. Of course, it did interest me. After that, I asked a Christian friend of mine about this, about did they know about anything about labyrinths in the churches and all, and the answer was no. So what I feel is that this could be a very a good opportunity for people to know, and something very different, something which they haven't seen. So of course there are all kinds of people, one who will never try a new thing and one who will always try a new thing. But when I saw your videos on the labyrinth, the portable labyrinth that you have, there are some videos on Facebook. I personally found it very interesting. Something I kind of feel, okay, I want to walk on this and see what it feels like and what it looks like, you know. So yes, because the labyrinths we know, the mazes we have seen in the architecture, you cannot see them from top. I mean, there's no, you don't know this is the beginning. There is going to be a center where you're going to arrive. Nothing like that. It's a maze. You get in and you don't know, you cannot get out until the guide tells you where to go out from. And then you say, oh, this is where it was. And I was just standing there all the time, you know. So yes, I think it could be very interesting. But people have their own faiths and they do have their own views about things. So maybe I wouldn't say that everybody would be interested, but yes, there would be a certain interest in something new and how you can use the labyrinth to get in touch with your own self or to go into that spiritual mode. That certainly is very interesting. Especially, I think with all the faiths, so many faiths coexisting here, and you being interested in interfaith, I think that could be real, something that you could benefit from, something that you could add to your writing also, I think.
Exactly. Yes. So that could well be a way forward. But firstly, the American project is likely to be another year, I would think, before that is finished, because it's still partly to do with my own time commitments and finances and what remains on that journey as far as it's been revealed. So my sense is that probably, while there may be some beginnings of the next thing, it's not necessarily going to be revealed totally just yet. So I just hold that open again.
Okay. At the end, pat your own back moment. Something that you're really proud of having done.
I think I'm proud of following my own course, with hopefully being open to the divine. I've had the opportunity to do that, as I was mentioning earlier, but I think, like this moment about the labyrinth journey, there was a choice. And there have been moments like that in my life. When I became a house sitter, I was renting a flat, apartment in Brighton, a city I loved, and I had to give that up. The landlord wanted it back, and the kind of logical thing at that time would have been to carry on, go and find somewhere else to live in the same place. And I had quite a strong feeling, no, now's the time not to do this. You're not going to be here, even though you love this place permanently now. And so you go through that kind of grief, as it were, and giving up. When you leave your house, you have to downsize and give things away and so on, which is very liberating as well. And so there are points like that where I've made some decisions. I think, very insightfully, you asked a question about saying no to things that you won't do as well. That's also important, where your energy is not necessarily going to be well focused. But it's an ongoing journey. You know, I can easily get distracted, and you know, far from perfect in terms of the course I have at the moment. But I think the fact that I am going with my conviction, going where I believe is right, which ultimately is what we all, you know, we all ministers, we all have a gift to give, we all have a role to play, we all have learnings for ourselves to gain. For some of us, the opportunities are more obvious than others. It's not always easy in different circumstances that you're in. But where you are able to take a step and pursue this course of self-discovery, this course of ministry, as it were, then that's a great one to take, really. And it comes down to your perspective. This is where I struggle, because I still think about my future and my security when I get older, etc., etc. Probably more so than I should. I should be more trusting that will be okay. But really, it is a case of surrendering. It is a case of giving up and not looking too far beyond the step in front. Sometimes there's a saying, there's an ambition, or there's a bit of a vision of what's shaping, and you know that's growing and developing. But it's not the life I used to live of goals, objectives, projects. Well, projects do come into it, but not quite the same. Not quite the same pressures, perhaps, that I used to, or constraint, should I say, that I used to operate under.
Okay. Thank you, Clive, for spending your time out of your busy day. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, and an honor as well. Bless you.